Hey guys and gals, before we get to this video on aerobic power VO2 max intervals, I want to stop and just again ask if you're taking a look at these videos on a regular basis and you're not subscribed, I would really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button. This ratio has changed a little bit from the last couple of videos, but still it looks like almost 70% of you guys who are watching are still not subscribed, and only 30% of the views are coming from subscribers. So if you are in that position and you are interested in this type of content, I put out about 3 to 5 videos or so a week on different aspects of running. I would really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button. It would really help me out a lot, not just the fact that it shows support to the channel, but it kind of allows it to be recommended to other people that do different searches. And also, interesting enough, I guess the second biggest country that the views are coming from are the Netherlands. So not just if you're in the United States watching this, give it a subscribe. If you're also watching this in the Netherlands, go ahead and hit that subscribe button too. I would really appreciate it. Again, all it does is just show support for the channel and allows it to be able to jump into other people's feeds too. So appreciate that, guys. Now let's get to the video on VO2 max workouts. Hey everyone, welcome back to this workout video. This one, our last of our critical type workouts in the general preparation phase of the cross-country season. We're looking at the VO2 max runs that are not just testing. We're going to look here at specifically what we're going to call interval type workouts. We'll look again at why they're so critical to cross-country success, how to design them, how to sequence them into a fictitious calendar, and all these different things we've done with some of these other video workout types that we've already talked about here. And the idea of the VO2 max run, we want to improve your body's ability to maximally use oxygen. That's what this workout and no other workout type really gets as we're taking a look at this. There's a lot of different things you need to do to get yourself in shape for 5,000 meter race of who can be the fastest over this period of time. And obviously volume is really important, the amount of miles, but when it comes down to any type of race, it's not how far you can run, it's how fast you can run. And these are the type of workouts that you really need to mix in, along with all the easy type runs I've talked about with the long and recovery runs that are most of your volume of your week. You still need to run fast, and this is a relatively fast type workout. Still high volume, but relatively fast. And again, as long as they're really keeping track of how fast you get from point A to point B, not just how far you can run, you have to really kind of develop this ability to maximally use oxygen, because that is the bottleneck. Picture here that you're seeing, this is our 2016 team from Wharton High School, right after placing top 10 in the state, team here, and then our legendary assistant coach, Wesley Newton, who's been kind of my mentor here at the school for many years. Before this, our group hadn't advanced out of districts in 8 years, and then we've now made it to states every year since 2016, so this was kind of our turning point, and things like this type of workout are what have kind of allowed us to make this a little bit more regular for us. So let's kind of take a look at this critical workout type. I am Kyle Giacono. I'm the head boys cross-country and track coach at Wharton High School. This will be my 7th cross-country season. I just completed my 7th track season. Some of my other credentials, or more importantly, my athlete credentials, are there on the screen. Alright, so this is again our, there are 3 types of workouts that we've identified as critical for cross-country success. These are the workouts vitally important to success in developing the key factors needed for success in the cross-country 5K. We've also got important workouts and then not important workouts, and not that these are bad workouts, it's during the general preparation phase, where do these things fit in. So these are important, but not during this time of year. We've already talked about the long run, we talked about VO2 max testing, and we talked about the recovery run. Here's a VO2 max run to get more volume than just a test workout to kind of stretch you out beyond just 3,200 meters. Coming up, we'll talk about these different workout types too in their own videos. So that's what we're looking at here, VO2 max runs, specifically how to go beyond just a test. So as I always do, let's talk a little about the race metrics before we figure out why this workout matters at all. So a study done by Ingham, published in 2018, they looked at a bunch of different things in the athlete, and they found the single biggest predictor of who had the most success in the 5K was who had the most developed VO2 max. Now, we've already talked about, and we'll bring it up again, there's different ways you can develop VO2 max, but specifically running right at VO2 max and developing this ability to maximally use oxygen, found that 94.3% of the time who had the best VO2 max won the race. And I'm sure, I mean, they didn't study it this way, but if you went and looked at it, I'm sure it would be fairly similar for second place had the second best, third place had the third best, that kind of thing as you go down. From the USATF cross country from distance curriculum, USATF, USA Track and Field, we'll find that the 5K is run very close to VO2 max at 97% of it, which is probably why VO2 max is so closely associated with success in that event. And then study released in 2018 by Dr. Matter and Dr. Hartman to look at the energy where it was coming from. ATP in the creatine phosphate system contributes 4% at race pace to this event. The anaerobic glycolytic system, the system that is those workouts that we said are not important now but will be later on, is going to contribute 10% of the energy. And then the aerobic system, not surprising, is going to contribute the lion's share, 86%. And again, at race pace, if you just walk a 5K, it's almost going to be 100% aerobic, but you're not going to get any success that way, obviously. So this is what we're looking at here, aerobic side, and how that fits into VO2 max development, 86% of the energy coming from that system in the 5K. All right, so this is what we were talking about in the long run and the recovery run videos. Central VO2 max, this is what people usually think about when we think about VO2 max, and this is improved with just general aerobic work of at least 20 continuous minutes, but it can also be improved with intervals, and I'll explain that a little bit later on. So it can be faster running with slower running, provided your heart rate doesn't drop too much. This part of VO2 max generally improves as the body's ability to move oxygen from the heart outward. So these are all adaptations that do things like bigger heart, more blood vessels. They're moving oxygen from the center of your body outward. Okay, that's not what we're necessarily focusing on today, but that's what people usually think about in terms of improving VO2 max. Recovery runs, long runs, all those types of bulk miles add to this area. Key to central VO2 max development is continuous runs, typically at low intensity, but again, I'll show you how it can also happen with intervals here today. Volume is the intensity on those days. What we're dealing with here today is peripheral VO2 max, what's not usually thought about. And this is, you'll hear me call these VO2 max workouts. They're also probably more correctly called aerobic power. VO2 max is 100% VO2 max, right? 100% of it. The range that we're dealing with here in these workout types is 98 to 101% of your VO2 max, 100%. That's truly aerobic power. So you'll hear me interchange those. I usually just call it VO2 max. It's what I usually say around the kids that I'm training, so I'll use those interchangeably, same thing. But more accurately, this is 100%. Aerobic power is 98 to 101% of VO2 max. This area, peripheral VO2 max, won't improve if the intensity is too slow or too fast. Why is that? So if it's too slow, the body won't build some energy expensive structures due to you're not right at the point of oxygen debt. So running right at maximum oxygen use. VO2 max is the pace at which your body cannot use any more oxygen. You're capped out. Anything beyond that, and you are using anaerobic energy. If you don't run right at that area, your body thinks everything's good. I'm still supplying enough energy with what I have, and your body does not want to develop structures that are energy expensive for no reason. This type of training is just all about tricking your body into thinking you need more than you need to survive, and to build something called myoglobin, we'll talk about a little bit later, you have to be right at VO2 max. And we saw that from the 5K. If you run at 5K pace, it's a little bit too slow to get the maximum amount out of these types of workouts. You start running at tempo pace, lactic threshold, well, that's way slower. That's 85%. You start running at critical velocity or 10K pace, that's 92%. That's also not fast enough. Those are great workouts and do different things like running economy and storing of energy, but they're not going to improve your body's ability to extract oxygen maximally. Now, a lot of people think, well, faster is better, right? Well, not necessarily. You go too fast, and now the blood's going to be moving too quickly past the working muscles for it to extract it maximally. It's also not going to warrant this myoglobin development. These are the energy expensive structures we're talking about. Also, you'll see that if you go too fast, you start developing acid. Some of the muscles start to shut down, or the enzymes, and they can't contract as fast. Because they don't like the increased acid. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. This is a Goldilocks workout. Just right is just right, and it's a kind of a narrow window, and it kind of comes with practice, not just for you, but your athletes in terms of being able to hit this target as you're doing it. But the best time to do it is in general prep, because you're generally building bulk miles still. Again, generally improves as the body increases the ability of working muscles to extract oxygen from the blood. Once it has done this, your mitochondria can use it for energy. So the idea of these two things work together. You work on central VO2 max on the longer days to move more blood around your body. You work on peripheral VO2 max on aerobic power VO2 max days, so that once it's moved from the center of your body, the peripheral, the working muscles, can actually use it. This is important, but if your working muscles can't absorb it, it doesn't matter if you have millions and millions of miles of capillaries or all the oxygen in your blood. This is how you get it into the working muscles so your mitochondria can use it. So these have to be developed equally. You got to move the oxygen from your heart. You got to be able to move the oxygen from your blood into the working muscles. These things work together. Again, the key to peripheral VO2 max is running right at current VO2 max. These are relatively high intensity and high volume days, and that's a problem, right? You can't do a lot of this altogether. Usually it's inverse. These type of workouts are typically low intensity, high volume. Typically, if you're doing something like a special endurance or a speed type of day, the volume's low and the intensity is high. While this is not the fastest pace they can go, it's still, it's relatively fast, relatively slow. It's 2-mile pace, right? It's right in the middle of the energy continuum we'll look at in a second. But the volume is very high, so they can only happen about once per microcycle, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. So you've seen this before, but in the other videos, we've really talked about the other things here that are not highlighted, all the circulatory system improvements from more central VO2 max. This is peripheral VO2 max, myoglobin, okay? This sounds like hemoglobin because it's very similar. Hemoglobin carries the oxygen on your blood. Myoglobin is in your working muscles, and this is what pulls the oxygen off the hemoglobin into the working muscles. I always think about this, kind of a cute way of thinking about it, I guess. Maybe it's a little juvenile, but it's just how I remember it. Myoglobin's like the oxygens are really an oxygen net, and it's like, it's mine, it's my oxygen, it's my O2, essentially. That's how I look at it and I think about it in this way. It's the ability for your working muscles to grab the oxygen and use it. Developed by training right at VO2 max, 98 to 101%, due to forcing the body to operate right at oxygen debt. We've talked about this. Bigger mitochondria also are developed when you run right at VO2 max. Mitochondria, the way they produce energy is through the surface area. It kind of slingshots hydrogen ions, which is anaerobic energy production, makes that. And then the mitochondria kind of slingshot it back and forth through its surface area to make more ATP aerobically. Bigger mitochondria, more surface area, meaning more ATP production. So all these other things are important, the central VO2 max days, like more mitochondria and all that, but the only way to really develop more myoglobin and bigger mitochondria, which is also important, is to run right at VO2 max. These are structural in nature, building more myoglobin, building bigger mitochondria. So just like any aerobic system improvements, they're structural in nature. They change body shape structures and require a lot of time to fully develop. Again, this is why these are important in general prep, because it takes 20+ weeks. When we look at our fictitious calendar, we've got 23 weeks by this like fake macrocycle that we're developing here before what our state meet would be in Florida, which is November 7th. It might be a little bit different for you, but that's kind of what we'll be building in a fake macrocycle here. All right, other adaptations of VO2 max runs, just like the other ones, there are some things we're dealing with here. Muscular system, again, this is a myoglobin thing too. It's also on the muscle system to bring it into working muscles, increase mitochondria surface size and area. We've already talked about that. We're going to have slow twitch muscle fibers being enhanced. Just running does that. Low intensity, high intensity. It's going to use your aerobic energy system, aerobic muscles. You're going to increase capillaries, and we'll talk about how you can get this development a little bit. The bolded and underlined ones are the focus on VO2 max days, but you can get some of these other things that you get on other aerobic runs, like increased mitochondria number and increased running economy. Whenever you're running, you can increase your economy, essentially. Running economy improves by running, so this is running, so you can definitely get running economy improvements in the muscular system. And metabolically, you are going to have, at this type of running, this type of pace, lactic acid is going to develop some. We'll talk about that in the very next slide. And this is going to help increase your body's ability to remove it. The aerobic system uses the lactic acid or the free acid ions that break off of it for its own energy system. So this kind of utilizes your body's ability to remove it, use it for its own energy production in other ways. increase glycogen storage, stored glucose by the working muscles. This is relatively fast running, so it's going to be supplied by glucose. It's going to be the glucose in your blood system first, through your bloodstream, and then glycogen being converted into glucose. Increase aerobic enzyme volume and activity. Just generally running gets this, and again, running economy is metabolic as well as muscular. Again, these are high intensity. These workouts make the designed adaptations quite different from continuous running. You're really focusing on the bolded and underlined. And as I mentioned, you can get some of the benefits from the central VO2 max workouts or adaptations, the ones that are not bolded or underlined. Back like we talked about on recovery runs, and with active recovery too, that we'll talk about here in these this video, or these other slides. I have some videos from workouts I can show you too to show you how this works. Active recovery, so you've got a pace you run for a certain interval, and then you have the recovery. The recovery part is actually the interval in this. That's what I'm talking about. Active recoveries are always recommended, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. In short, because we just went through a lot, these workouts focus on increasing the body's oxygen extraction capabilities at the working muscles, okay? Oxygen's the bottleneck. We don't store oxygen as humans. A lot of good reasons why that is the case, but it hurts aerobic energy. So what we need to do is enhance our ability to use oxygen at the working muscles. That's what we're, in short, doing here. Several side benefits, again, those are the side benefits we're talking about here, the ones that are not bolded, but we need to target the peripheral VO2 max, the ones that are bolded and underlined. Alright, where do VO2 max runs fit in? Surprisingly, probably not so much. We're looking at VO2 max right in here, and you'll notice when I'm circling this, it's not including 5K pace, not 97%, not 102%, but what I imagine 101 and 98% is right here. This is from the USATF distance curriculum, what I was kind of citing before with 5K being 97%. You've heard me say 10K is 92%. Marathon pace is 82%. We've got things that we've talked about previously about long and recovery runs that are down here. Now we're relatively fast. We're in right here, right at 2-mile pace as best as we can. It's called VO2 max. If you were to extend this pace out, if you're talking maybe to your sprint coach and some things we'll talk about in later workouts, this is sort of the idea that they would call extensive tempo. Maybe you've got a sprint coach on your team that does, 6 to 8 times 200 or 400 with their sprinters at a, for them, relatively low intensity. It's, for the most part, going to be including a VO2 max for us, but again, the window's a little bit shorter. This is a little bit old. Old VO2 max charts would tell you 97 to 102% were fine. New data would say that this is actually the best way, and if we're going to do these types of workouts, we want maximum benefit. So that's why 101 to 98%. And again, you'll see aerobic power. Again, it does include a little bit of a bigger range, but when we're dealing with VO2 max, right in here is what we are dealing with. Again, this is not a continuous run. It is too high intensity to be done continuously. The furthest you can go on this is 10 minutes, usually about 2 miles. That's why the test we'll talk about is a 2-mile test that really kind of helps you set up workouts with this. You might have a boy that's under 10 minutes. We have a boy at our school right now that when we do a VO2 max test, he's always under 10 minutes, practice, whatever. Really doesn't make sense, though, to kind of extend them out past it. It's pretty much going to be the same thing, unless you have a kid that's under 9 minutes, which probably not. Maybe, but not many of those every single year. That would be the only way that you might want to kind of change that a little bit. In previous workouts, we talked about how you can also do this based on heart rate. Aerobic power VO2 max workouts, heart rate is really hard to measure because of just the nature of the workouts, the starting and stopping and all that. Technically, VO2 max does correspond to a specific heart rate for people, but you would really have to get into a lab, measure true VO2 max in a lab, not a field test, and figure out what their heart rate is when they reach VO2 max, and it's just really too complicated. So for this, it's really best to just kind of focus on the pace that you've set up based on your VO2 max testing. Alright, I promised this earlier. This is what the lactic acid looks like. This is what lactic acid is in your body. For about a quarter second, if you've ever wondered or cared what lactic acid looks like. So aerobic power VO2 max, again, it's the highest point of oxygen use reached during exhaustive exercise. It does come with a significant increase in the anaerobic energy demand. So actually, let me go back. This is a tempo type pace, tempo workouts, lactic threshold workouts. This is where your body is producing and clearing hydrogen ions in unison, right? Equal parts aerobic to anaerobic system. Your anaerobic system produces the hydrogen ions, and the aerobic system, through its own use of the mitochondria, is using this for its own energy supply, and they work in unison. There's no buildup or accumulation of hydrogen ions, right? The aerobic system is still producing the lion's share of the energy, but you're getting some help from the anaerobic system. Well, now we're at VO2 max. There is accumulation of acid because you're just producing too much energy anaerobically. The aerobic system, while it's very developed at this point, just cannot clear quite a bit of it. So that's important as we look at this. So comes with a significant increase in anaerobic energy demand. Aerobic energy production is slower, right? So we just said it can keep up with the anaerobic system to a point, but the aerobic system is much more efficient. It creates easy to deal with waste products. It's why you can do a long run for up to 2 hours or whatever you're doing. I wouldn't recommend that for a high school kid, but you can theoretically do it, right? Because the only waste products are CO2, you breathe it out, water, your body uses it or you exhale a little bit of it. These are the only waste products with aerobic energy. It's very clean, but it's much slower, right? So when you start going faster, this starts to be produced with, and I'll talk about that in 1 second, anaerobic energy production is much faster, but it burns much more glucose, and it's much more difficult waste product. So you start burning energy anaerobically, you can eventually run out of the fuel source. It's going to take a while. You have about 2 hours worth of stored glucose, but it could happen. That's like hitting the wall in a marathon. But usually why you stop is this much more difficult waste product is produced with anaerobic energy production, anaerobic glycolytic, burning glucose with the anaerobic system. It's lactic acid. So really the lactic acid in your body lasts about 1/4 of a second. Then your body splits it right here. This is very unstable in the human body. This, from this little red line here over to the left, this still relatively big molecule then becomes lactate. Your body moves it to the liver, and your body can actually resynthesize the lactate into more fuel source, more glycogen, stored glucose for later on. This is the problem. This is the H+ ion we saw on the last slide. This causes your body pH to drop. Your muscles do not like that. Specifically, the enzymes in your muscles that contract hate this. The human body likes to be right at 7.0. If you remember from your chemistry class as a sophomore or whenever you took it, this drops the pH, and this is the problem. This is why you can only run so fast for so long, the buildup of these little guys in your bloodstream. We typically measure lactate, and we used to think that lactate was the problem, but it really isn't. This can cause some swelling, but this is not really the reason you're going to stop. Because this is so small, the reason why we measure lactate is because they come in a 1-to-1 ratio. This is produced, it splits after 1/4 second. This gets moved to your liver to become more glucose. This sits in your muscles and causes problems. Now, the aerobic system can use a lot of this for its own energy production. It's why you can do an easy run in between. We're going to talk about active recovery. It helps get rid of this so you can extend out the workout. It's why you do a cool down afterwards. I recommend longer cool downs. We'll talk about it later on. It also metabolizes this, so the low energy, low intensity stuff of the cool down or the recovery period, the active recovery, helps your body take this, your mitochondria use it for its own energy system, and then this goes bye-bye, and your body pH again goes back up to 7.0, so you can do some more work or you can start recovering for the next day. Limiting factor on these days is accumulation of acid at the working muscles. As we talked about in the last slide, your body is going to be producing more of this than it can clear. We can, by doing the interval, the shorter than 2-mile type reps, get more total volume than 3,200 meters with the active recovery, but the reason they're going to end up having to stop today is the accumulation of acid in the working muscles. All right, so we've talked about a lot of whys, why we're doing this, the adaptations, what VO2 max is, all the different things that go into it. Now let's look at how we can set up from VO2 max testing data, how we can set our intensity, the narrow window on the day. So we've talked about this. We'll use the same fictitious kid, Ashton protocol, warm up, really great, go and run 2 miles. Let's say this kid runs 10:30, pretty good if it's general prep phase. find if it's a boy at 10:30, if it's a girl, it's possibly a state champion. And then we're going to find the mile pace of this, resulting in a VO2 max, another term here, velocity. That's all this little v means. VO2 max is when your body hits maximum oxygen use. The little v here just means the velocity or the pace at which your body hits VO2 max. And for this kid, running 10:30 and 2 miles, their date pace VO2 max is 5:15, so that is our 100%, you could say. So aerobic power is going to include that, but it's a little bit of a bigger window, so it's not too tricky to find that. Aerobic power VO2 max workout target is 98 to 101%, so just like on the other videos, how many seconds are in 5:15? We're going to go 5 times 60 to get 300. We're going to add the 15 to it, and we're going to get 315. We're going to divide that by 0.98 because we are going to get a bigger number because 98% is slower, equals 321. We'll figure out that 300 is 5-minute pace, so we've got 21. We've got the first parameter, the 98 of 521. We do not want to run any slower than this during the actual reps. And to get 101, we're going to divide by 0.01, so now we're going to get a slightly smaller number of 311. This person's range for this type of workout should be 511 to 521 to be in this window, and as we talked about, for all the reasons, you got to run in that area, the Goldilocks effects for these kids. The other test is the VHIL protocol. Again, this is of a mile best pace. Again, this is how you're weaning a kid maybe that's an 800-meter kid that wants to give cross-country a try. Only do these a couple times to get them used to it. I explained this more in the VO2 Max video. It's in the description down below, along with a couple others that I've referenced in this video. Let's say this person runs at 4:55. We can do the same thing. We would find the VHIL test protocol says that you run your mile at 91% of the pace of VO2 max, so it's going to be faster. So the mile is faster, so we need to now get a bigger number to figure out what their VO2 max is. Same thing, we have to figure out the number of seconds. 4 times 60 plus 55, we'll get 295. Again, that makes sense. 5-minute pace is 300 seconds. Divide by 0.91 to get the bigger number, 324. They have a VO2 max of 524 on that date. Aerobic power VO2 max workouts, 98% to 101%. So same thing as we did before. Get the total seconds, divide by 0.98, 530. Same thing, divide by 1.01. This should be 320 seconds. Not 420 seconds, but 520. So that's typically what I find when a kid is in this range, when their VO2 max is somewhere between say 530 to about 510, 505. It's typically for mile pace about a 10-second window, which seems like that'd be really hard to hit. It is the first couple times you do it, but as you do this throughout the year, and you'll see you're going to do about one of these you're going to do one of these about every week, they'll get better used to actually doing it. In previous slides like this, I talked about how you can hybridize, say, long runs for your more experienced kids. There is really no difference in this type of workout for experienced versus novice runners on the pace, right? The pace still has to be right at 100%. The difference here comes from the length of the rep and the total volume. So now we've got the intensity. Let's look at a couple workouts that you can do during the general prep phase to work on aerobic power / VO2 max. Again, you're going to do one of these per microcycle in general prep, and typically, I would say you're only going to have a 7-day microcycle in general prep, meaning you're not going to start repeating workouts. You don't have too many things to get done in general prep, so you can get all of them done in 1 week. As you get a little bit later on and you start adding some different things, your microcycle might be a little bit longer. I do recommend that. But for right now, 1 per microcycle, and right now that means basically 1 per week. Later in the year, you'll have weeks where you have these workouts and you have races, which technically you could say count as 2. A little bit more so in the track season when you've got 2 miles going on, because that's really a VO2 max workout. But a 5K, you could say you might get some VO2 max, peripheral VO2 max aerobic power, even though it's not quite fast enough. But that's later on in the year when you're a little bit more in shape. Do not plan 2 of these together. As we said, these are pretty high intensity, pretty high volume. All right, intervals, okay? We've heard of them. What does it actually mean? You've got a period of fast running and a period of recovery, right? The rest period is actually the interval itself. That's what it's named after. And the idea being is intervals allows you to increase the total volume on aerobic power work for the day beyond 3,200 meters. We talked about previously the actual test, and that's one of the workouts you can do, but you can only run 3,200 meters of VO2 max. We talked about the VHIL protocol before. One of the reasons I don't like it is you don't really get VO2 max development on that day, that mile. But the idea being is when we do intervals, we can do a lot more total work at VO2 max or aerobic power beyond 3,200 meters to get a little bit more bulk volume, and that's really what you're dealing with in general prep anyway. The bouts of work are generally recommended, and I definitely subscribe to this, of 800 meters to about 1,600 meters, meaning each interval or work period is that long. You go less than that, and you're not getting enough time in the zone to really get a lot of improvements. Like if you try and do 400s or even 600s. 600s maybe if you're dealing with, maybe if you're a middle school kid that's like 8th grade, but I wouldn't really recommend this for middle school kids anyway. A lot of these things, as kind of talked about in comments previously, these are more for high school type kids. Middle school kids, younger kids, you know, 12, 13, that kind of thing. Maybe if they've hit their growth spurts and puberty a little bit earlier, but they don't respond to this as well because of the acid really hits them a lot more. But 800 to 1,600 meters is really what you want to shoot for. Some of your kids will not get to 1,600 meters, and we'll talk about why that is when I show you the videos of the actual workouts. And they're all going to be at this range. So we're going to take our same kid at 5:15 at VO2 max, the one that did the 2-mile test on the previous slide. For these different paces, 800s would be 240 to 235. Again, they have a more narrow window. It's only 5 seconds. I would recommend typically doing times 7 of these for 5,600 meters. Thousands, this kid would be 319 to 313. I would recommend doing times 6 of these, so 6,000 meters obviously. You can do 1200s, which for this kid would be 4 to 352. You do times 5 of them, you've got 6,000 meters. That's a good workout, and then a great workout here, doing miles 521 to 511, right at that, times 4, 6,400 meters. This is about as far as I would take most high school kids. The literature would say you can go as far as 9,600 meters with kids this age, but I just think you're going to need 3 days to recover from, and it just doesn't really benefit you to have to take 3 days to recover from one workout. As you were doing these, so let's take the mile repeats. I really like this, especially during general prep after you've done maybe like 800s for one, build up to thousands, after maybe 1 or 2 of these workouts to get to times 4 1600s. You have this kid go out, you say, all right, let's run 521 to 511, and they come through and they run 518 for the first one, great. And you're going to tell them that rest equals work, active recovery. So you're going to say just jog really easy, just keep the aerobic system moving a little bit, get any of that acid that's developed in there out, again, with easy aerobic type work to get the hydrogen ions being used up by the mitochondria. And for this, rest equals work. You might have a group of kids, like you've got this kid here, you might have a kid that's targeting maybe 530, another kid that's like 535. You can keep them somewhat together and say all of you guys have 535 rest. It's better to give this top kid just a tiny bit more work and let the other kid have proper rest. They need to hit the target on this day, and we'll talk about this. I'll emphasize this at the end of the video. It's better to give an extra 5 seconds and hit the time than not and miss out, because, I mean, you would think counterintuitively, oh, I'm going to give them less work, it's going to make them stronger, and they're going to come back better the next time. Again, if you're not at VO2 max, if you're not right at that 98 to 101%, you're not getting the benefit. Doesn't work on this day. Again, counterintuitive to what you would normally do. They got to hit their targets on this day, okay? And then active recovery. Again, the fact that they're running a mile and then they're going to do active recovery for about 5:30, they're going to get at least 800 meters in that. We've now made it a continuous run, and this is how you can also get some central VO2 max, because their heart rate is not going to drop all that much. They're going to be in that training zone, so they're going to get a pretty good continuous run with bouts of peripheral VO2 max being worked on at the same time. Again, pick what makes sense to your kids. I would recommend 4,000 to 7,000 meters. As you are doing this, again, it sort of depends on your kids and your situation. So you might have kids that are doing, younger kids that are doing times 8, 800s, and that would get them to 4,000 meters, a good starting point. At the same time that you might have kids doing times 5, 1200s or something like that. You got to kind of mix it up in the workouts. It's kind of not a good idea to come to the track that day or the field or wherever you do this and say, all right, we're going to do, and we're going to do this, and everyone's doing times 4 miles. I don't care how long it takes. You know, mix it up. And it kind of sometimes can work out. What I'll find is usually with my first group, if they're doing this, and it's like 520 or something, the group that's only able to hold 1200s maybe for times 4 or times 5 is typically a similar kind of pace. It might not work out that way. This one gets a little confusing because you're doing, 2.5 laps, but as they do more of it, and you'll see in the workout, they're going to break up as this workout goes on anyway. You're not going to all have the same rest and everything, so they're going to actually start self-managing managing themselves, and allow them to do that. Have a kid that's in each group that has a watch and kind of help with it, and they'll help you with recording times and all that too. But somewhere between 4K and 7K meters I think is great for high school kids. VO2 max tests, we've talked about these previously, as well as races also can count as a VO2 max interval day. We want to obviously test their VO2 max often. We talk about every 3 weeks, doing it to make sure we're in the right range for types of workouts like this. So the Ashton protocol, 2 miles. On the Birchford protocol, 10 minutes best distance. I talk about this in previous videos. VO protocol, again, really doesn't count as a VO2 max day, but you're going to be retesting them. And a 5K or other races can test their VO2 max. If it's a 5K, very close to being a VO2 max workout day. 2 mile definitely is a VO2 max workout day. Should be done every 2 to 3 weeks to track fitness and update intensity. Where you do the tests is where you should do this workout too. So you're not trying to convert things. So if you want to do it at the track, you do your test at the track, great. Do your intervals at the track. During our school season, I do this, and I'll do these, but I'll do these at the school just for the sake of being able to manage it. During the summer, I'll a lot of times do their test and their intervals at a park where I've got an 800-meter loop that I can just kind of manage it depending on whatever the distance is here or the test or whatever. But try and keep them together so you're not trying to figure out, all right, we did our test here, and that's 2% slower than the track here, and you're kind of guessing. Because of the tight window here of 98 to 101%, I would do them at the same place. Total days volume typically less than on an interval day when you're doing a test, but they're still a great workout. Replaces the interval workout if you do a VO2 max. Do not try and do these all together, especially in general prep. If your kids want to do a 5K race in the summer, do not try and squeeze one of these in there too. They're not ready for it yet. These are somewhat high-intensity, high-volume days requiring at least 48 hours of recovery before another hard workout. The acid level, there's some small muscle traumas that happen in these, glycogen use, and there's a lot of mental fatigue, all right? So you have to sequence these smartly. This is the start of a VO2 max day. On this day, we were doing times 4,000s or 1,200s. The top kids, which are kind of over here, were doing 4 miles. The other kids were doing 1,200s. A lot of different ability levels on here. Some kids that are top 10 in the state, and we've got some kids that just started running with us a couple weeks before. You'll see these groups kind of start to open up. We've got different people helping us keep track of watches. Our girl Nia here has been doing it for a bunch of years, was helping be in charge of the group along with Danny. These kids, I'm going to manage just a little bit more. Those kids way out to the side, but there's a bunch of groups here, and you can see this can get confusing, so it does take practice, especially when you got soccer and other things kind of going on all at the same time. So again, just kind of giving some last instructions here. I actually misspoke. I'm not going to manage the top group on this day. This was a day that I jumped in, and I was pacing some of the kids. In this group, so here's, again, the group that is going to be out and pacing themselves, who have done this probably a million times before, I wasn't worried about as they were going through. And then I chose to pace the, we have a group of sophomores. Only one of them had ever run prior to this, and they were still very new. And then I had a bunch of kids that just showed up. Either they got cut from soccer, they got cut from basketball, hadn't really done anything before, and I was kind of trying to pace them because they were having trouble hitting these targets. Those boys that were up in the front, those kids that I was mentioning before, they were just absolutely perfect on getting these things solid and through, and I don't have to kind of manage them. As you'll see, this was our kid that really did great throughout the whole season. Let me back it up here. Who had a tendency to sometimes pull forward. What I was doing here was just trying to keep them all together at a point where I knew that they were going to be successful. As you'll see as this kind of plays out, we were on our rest period. I mentioned Nia comes through along with the rest of her group. She's helping me with timing. She's calling out times. Danny's doing the same. They're going to write down their own. That group's doing 1200s as this group is continuing on with their mile. It can get kind of confusing with all these different people kind of rolling through. The more you do it, the better they'll get at doing it. Here's a third or fourth group. That group doing miles still kind of going through. This group is going ahead and starting again. So they get good at timing themselves. If you preach the importance of hitting your targets with your kids, they will end up doing this. They won't lie to you. They won't do they won't give themselves too much extra rest as they go through. As I said, it is a hard workout. It is not easy to do times 4 miles or 1200s at this point, but when they're successful at it, you'll see they'll actually be really happy with you and themselves afterwards. I think this was the first time this young man hit 4 times miles at under 5-minute pace on all of them. You just kind of see it's hard work, but they definitely do get a lot out of it. And again, they'll be able to kind of self-manage themselves on a lot of this stuff if you do it right. Here's the workout results that I was just showing you. What you'll notice, and yes, this kid, so his range at this day was 502 to 453, 458, perfect, 455, perfect, 458, perfect, 455. I always keep track of the average on these days, but really it's more important to have them all in here. If you had a kid that was, say this kid went out and was 450 on the first one, and then 505 on the second one, and then 503 on the third one, and maybe the last one got down to 5 flat. Well, only one of those was really in the range, and we talk about the importance of having them all in the range. I keep track of the average just for kind of progress, like the previous time he was averaging 458. But really, this is more important to make sure you're in the range. Like this young man here was the same way. And Danny did this fantastically. Jared did it too. You kind of want the last one to be the fastest one if you can manage it. Thomas did that great. 5:16 was as fast as Jackson. If I remember correctly, I think I told the kids after this workout, this was the best workout I'd ever seen from any group I'd ever worked with as they were doing, because it was really kind of this whole thing. People were ending with their fastest rep being the last rep, and they weren't kind of going crazy. So it wasn't just that the average was in zone, it's that basically every rep was in zone, but then they got faster. The danger is on this day is maybe you have this kid go out and you say, all right, Jared, we're 502 to 453, and they try and hit 453 every single time, and then they regress a little bit, and maybe they're still, you really want them to end hard the way that you want them to kind of end their races if you can. So here were the averages on this day: 100%, perfect. We're looking for 98 to 101, 100%, 100%, 100%, 102%. This was a kid that was, again, just kind of was fairly new to running. He'd run cross country. This was actually a track workout, but same idea, it's aerobic power. So he may have just progressed to where I needed to retest him to. 101, 101. Maybe just need to be retested. Same thing with Jania here, 100%, 100%. So as you'll see, there was just a lot of just solid work here. January 25th, this would be like the general prep of the track season, if you want to think of it that way, too. Let's look at how we can kind of pencil these into a fictitious calendar again. In Tampa, Florida, we're not allowed to work with our kids right now. So this is in a perfect world where we would kind of fit these things in, right? So we're looking at June. There's some weeks that we've talked about prior to this that they could be doing some stuff on their own. I've left the recovery runs and the long runs on here. In the previous video, I showed you where you can put VO2 max tests. These are VO2 max workouts. They are in green. The intervals are going to be in yellow. What I would recommend is not doing an interval workout until they've got some work on them. They would fictitiously do something on their own here. A lot of recovery runs and long runs here in the first week that you would hopefully be able to work together. This is June 1st. VO2 max test to get accurate paces, and now you're really kind of cooking with gas here because you can set up the other workouts we've talked about. Don't do intervals until right here. They need to be relatively in shape as they're doing it. So you got intervals here. You'll notice the next test isn't until right here. No intervals in this week. General prep week 5, which bleeds over into July. It would be right here on July 2nd. As we're going through it, we come back and we do another one. Intervals. This is probably where you would go and increase. You would probably want to be at mile repeats. I think I would target by about here. So they've had a couple of them on there. They've had a chance to adapt throughout. You're going to retest them, come back and do intervals again here. As you'll see, we're not going crazy with trying to get too much of these all together. And as you're sequencing the workouts, you'll notice after VO2 max test, recovery run, intervals, recovery run, okay? Test, off day, okay? You got to give them something easy the day after something like this. Recovery run, recovery run, recovery run. Now, they can do a long run too. I don't know why I didn't line up on all these where I didn't have a long run here at some point, but especially after they've had, we're now in July, they've had 9 weeks of training on them, 10 weeks if you count the week before where they potentially could do some stuff on their own. They're definitely able to do this, but they really could have done a long run at any point afterwards. This is the same intensity as a recovery run. The best thing after something high intensity like this is to come back with low intensity stuff right here, get anything kind of cleared out of their system. Come back here. This was July, the last week of July 31st. General prep week 9. week 9, and then we've got the end of it here. So starting here with week 10, we've got a new VO2 max test. This is the first day of school, hopefully for us in Tampa, Florida. This is where I would do something like maybe set your varsity lineup, put something on this last one to really kind of go after it, because the first race is going to be right here, and then one more interval day. What you will notice is obviously during the summer, you don't have to really worry about heat and things like that, because they're obviously not having a school day. You can kind of plan things out a little bit more. When you get into the school day, and this will kind of manifest itself more with specific prep, you're going to have to probably start looking at, can I get them in on Saturdays when I can, when I don't have races? Danger point. So as I was saying, better to have all of them in their zone and not just having all the averages in the zone. Again, better to give a little more time off and keep the times in the zone within reason. Now, don't give them, you know, if they're doing mile repeats at 5:30, don't give them 10 minutes in between. That's a totally different workout called repetitions for the end of the season. But within reason, if you think an extra 10 seconds is going to make the difference to stay in the zone, give it to them. They have to hit their targets on this day. Heat is a huge factor on these days, and that's what I was mentioning when we're looking at the calendar. Try to have these on cooler days. When I'm planning my workouts, I try and have my long run on cool days and this on cool days. Now, the problem we have here in Tampa, Florida is we're getting into a period where we're not going to even, I mean, our low temperatures some days will wake up in the summer and it doesn't get below 80. So, especially when we get into the school year, if I wait for those days to do them after school, there's just no way. They're going to be cooked literally and figuratively. Heat is a huge factor on this day, and again, if they're not in their training zone, they're not going to get the O2 extraction benefits. Fortunately, at my school, we start at 8:40, so we can show up at 6:15 at the track, turn the lights on, get a 90-minute workout in. They can use the showers at the school, or they can go home or whatever, get themselves ready for the day if they live close, and it's not really a big issue. So that's how we've hybridized this. You may live in a part of the country where that's not a big issue. Maybe it's still relatively cool. I mean, no place is cool in the United States in August, but by September or whatever, and maybe you can get by with putting these on weekends when you're not racing to make sure that you're getting enough. Or you can look for, you know, days off and things like that if doing it before school just doesn't work with your school situation. But hybridize it, figure out how you can make it work, you know, before school if possible, off days from school, weekends, and that kind of thing. Be smart about the time and distance. We talked about this. It's more about time in the AP zone, so aerobic power zone. So if you've got a situation where you've got then true distances, 1200s for one kid might be as good as 1600s for another. As we look back at that group, we had some kids doing 16, some kids doing 12s. And like for that top kid we were looking at there, Jared, he's going, you know, just under 5 minutes for all of his miles. Well, that next group that's a little bit less experienced, that's doing 1200s, I think was targeting something like 4:45. They're getting the same time in the zone, which is really almost more important than truly the distance. So just really be smart about that. Look at that and really look at time in the zone. You might have a kid that's doing thousands and they're still very new and their 1,000 pace is 5 minutes, 4.5, something like that. Give it to them at that point. You really can't ask them to do VO2 max for, if you have a kid, you know, 8 minutes. I'm doing mile repeats, mile repeats, and that means that this kid might be running, you know, 8-minute pace. Well, they're almost doing a VO2 max test, right? 10-minute pace to exhaustion is one of the VO2 max tests. So just be smart about it. Younger and lesser trained kids are more affected by the acid also. So they might need shorter reps and total volumes. Just be smart about it and hybridize it as you're going through. Later on in the season, as these kids that are able to do 1600s in general prep get really fast, and maybe you're gonna ask them to go like 440 or something as their VO2 max really gets strong, you're gonna have to back them down for other reasons, down to 1200s and 1000s just because of it. But that's getting forward to specific prep and pre-comp and all those different things. For right now, just kind of be smart about time in the zone. All right, post-workout. A lot of people talk about post-workout, what the best thing is. These are very demanding days and they require care post-workout, right? You don't want one workout to linger for 4 or 5 days. Add some volume with a good long cool down. So you go out and you do 4 times miles and you got your recoveries in between. That's probably a 5-mile day right there. You probably did a mile warm-up, so you're at 6. Add a little more volume to it by going on a good 3 to 4 mile easy afterwards. On intervals, 3 miles is typically what I have my kids do. On a VO2 max test day where things are a little bit shorter, they're only doing 2 miles, I'll give them 4. So the volume isn't getting too low on these days either. The easy pace is going to help remove, well, let me get to that at one point. When you give them this, don't tell them to go their normal aerobic threshold pace, their easy pace from previous workouts. Do it on feel, heart rate 120 to 150. Their VO2 max is going to be or their recovery pace is going to be slower because of all the high intensity stuff they just did. So do it more on feel. It's going to add to their overall aerobic development. The reason why I don't like 2 miles, 2 miles is typically going to be less than 20 minutes, and as we talked about earlier, less than 20 minutes, no central VO2 max development. So 3 to 4 miles is a good way to get the volume up a little bit. It's going to add some volume, and it's going to clear that accumulated acid that could have happened from the workout. That is the limiting factors we talked about. They're going to come back from that cool down run. Great stretching routine. This also keeps the body moving to remove any waste products. Again, just that easy motion of the stretching. And it keeps your body temperature from dropping too quickly, which is really the reason you stretch afterwards. It really doesn't. I mean, the research on this has always been mixed. Does stretching afterward prevent injury? Well, really mixed. I would say probably no. But really what it's doing is it's helping your body temperature from dropping. They've been really heated up from all this work. The cool down also is going to help bring their temperature down a little bit and prevents them from more likely getting sick from something like this, and it just kind of brings you back to homeostasis a little bit more gradually. Alright, icing's a big debated area. Icing can help. I would say there's also mixed reviews, but anecdotally it seems to help, alright? I mean, a lot of places still do it, and if it's something that you want to include in everything else you're doing on that day, by all means, go ahead and do it. I personally have stopped doing these. About 2 or 3 years ago, I stopped doing this because the long cool down really does everything that icing serves to do, but icing doesn't get you aerobic benefits, right? 10 minutes in the ice bath is going to remove waste products, inflammation, lactic acid, that kind of thing, but you don't get any aerobic benefits. So that's why I do this. You get all the benefits of icing, but you also get the benefits of some aerobic work still being added. Okay, so I stopped doing it. I only do it if a kid requests it, if they just feel like it's going to help, you know, make them more fresh or whatever. Maybe it's a mental thing, whatever, as you're doing it. But I would definitely not do icing and replacing the long cool down. I would add it to it after the long cool down and after you're stretching. One thing that I have started doing in the last year or two is a relaxation techniques, and this is just an easy way to bring their heart rate down. 5 to 10 minutes, they're going to prop their legs up against something where their legs are way above their heart, up against a fence or wall or bench. The secret is you want no muscle tension if you can help it. The bench is great because you can just kind of like prop your legs up and just kind of sit there. Help them to keep their eyes closed. Just really kind of relax and breathe deep. Helps slowly bring their heart rate down and their metabolism back down. So here's an example of what it can look like. This happened after 1 hour VO2 max testing. I do this on like tempo runs and faster essentially. So VO2 max test, VO2 max intervals, faster work days. You can see their legs are just all propped up. Some of them are talking to each other. Some of them have their heads in their shirts. Eyes are closed, just kind of relaxing as best they can, bringing their heart rate down to a low level. Just really kind of trying to find some peace and serenity and bring their heart rate down to a slow level after everything you've just put them through on these tough days. So if you like this video, please think about liking or subscribing. I know it was very long, but these are very detailed type workouts that do require a lot of care, as you saw how confusing they can be as you have all the different groups going on. If you did like it, please, again, as I mentioned before, think about subscribing. Share it around if you think it's helpful for other people that are also running enthusiasts. We're going to look at the important but not critical workouts for cross-country next, looking at alactic runs, hill runs, and tempo runs. Some really important things to make sure you also find time for. We'll look at sequencing and all that in the next couple of videos. So again, if you like this video, like, subscribe, share around, and until next time, this has been Coachy TV.